Hello, and thanks for joining us this week. We are joined by Laurent Gray and Brandon Kovacs to go over the week's headlines in cybersecurity. First up, we're going to be talking about Promptware leveraging Google Calendar invites and how attackers are embedding malicious code inside Google Calendar invites to manipulate AI assistants. Laurent, you want to tackle that one?
Yeah. So like Google Calendar invites aren't new, aren't a new vector. They've been around for a bunch of years, but I think the integration of AI and Claudebot and all that stuff into your daily calendars and anything that can provide any sort of remote code execution is pretty dangerous, right? For lack of a better
Yeah.
word. It's very interesting that people are prompting the AI assistants to do that. But I think it's just going to be a new attack surface that everyone has to worry about, right? Getting prompt injected depends on the quality of the model. It depends on the quality of the software handling the model. And so if one person is vulnerable, everybody's vulnerable. So calendar invites, taking an old trick, teaching it to a new dog, I think is a pretty interesting approach for malware authors.
Yeah. So just decline everything.
Yeah, I don't go to meetings.
Let's see. We also have from the Hacker News, first malicious Outlook add-in stealing credentials. This is a hijacked Microsoft Outlook add-in that used an abandoned domain to serve a credential harvesting login page, exposing how trusted marketplace integrations can be attack paths. Laurent, you have anything on this too?
I like this attack a lot. I was just introduced to it, and I think that domain takeovers can happen anywhere in places that people don't expect, right? We talk about subdomain takeovers in the normal context of, hey, you hosted a resource here, and now it's no longer there, and so I take over it. And we look for that like with all of our clients, really. But the interesting thing here is that particularly in the Azure and Microsoft ecosystem, when you have something that's called a multi-tenant app, it applies to any tenant where that application is installed. So for example, if you have like an application like 1Password, for example, all right, 1Password is what we consider a multi-tenant app because multiple tenants are allowed to authenticate to it. So in this particular vulnerability, this attacker found an abandoned domain that was used in a multi-tenant application in the form of an Outlook add-in. And more importantly, this Outlook add-in had very specific permissions, right? Sort of slightly privileged permissions that allowed them to, I believe it was to read mail or something like that and to write mail. And so those sorts of things can just pop up anywhere. So the moral of the story is you really need to be reviewing your Outlook add-ins, your applications, anything that is a third-party asset, right? As part of your third-party risk management profiles. And
Yeah.
if you just want to block them overall, right, all these random add-ins, you should probably do that too.
Yeah. Yeah. We also have from Security Week, we've got Zero Day Rat Mobile Spyware Kit that is a new spyware toolkit that's capable of full iOS and Android compromise, being marketed openly via Telegram. So that is a lower barrier to full device compromise capabilities. What's the implication here?
Well, mobile devices are hard for exploitation anyway, right? They require
Yeah.
some sort of user interaction. Usually you
Yeah.
install an app or something like that, and the user is then compromised. But in this case, the fact that it's being distributed isn't new. Malware researchers sell their stuff everywhere. Telegram, WhatsApp, dark web type stuff. That's not a new concept. When they say nation state grade mobile capabilities, I wonder about that, but I do think that a lot of the information that you would find in a mobile implant is pretty generic across the board, such as right things that are on the clipboard, where you have your passwords, being able to enumerate the applications and their services and their databases and whatever application data exists. If this is just a sort of a user level uh, application compromise, meaning that you don't have full kernel level compromise for that device because it's not rooted or something like that, then Sure, it can be nation state level as we consider it, but
Yeah,
if it's not something like, I don't know, Pegasus, right? Um, all you really need to do, and I say all, so take that with a little bit of grain of salt here, but like all you really need to do is ensure that you aren't installing things that you shouldn't be installing. A lot of applications on the marketplace are not good. They are intended to be devious in some way. And
yeah,
so, particularly on the Android and Google Play system, right? That's where you
yeah,
find the majority of things that are less vetted than the iOS Apple Play Store. And so, just be careful, I
yeah,
guess. That's the most advice you can give
yeah,
anybody.
Yeah, and the
yeah,
problem is definitely more pervasive on Android app stores, just because their rules for releasing applications are less restrictive as they are for the iOS ecosystem, right? Getting an
yeah,
application deployed. But yeah, at least from my understanding, this attack chain, the mobile rat, at least how they market themselves, it's an all-in-one kit where there's a web dashboard. The operator can customize their payload, create something, and then from there, it's up to them on how they actually deploy it, whether it's through phishing or coercing the victim some way, shape, or form to visit a website. And at least from the report here, from what it says, it looks like it exploits some sort of browser-based vulnerability. All the user has to do is visit the web page, and then from there, it's able to establish a foothold onto the device, perform privilege escalation, and then from there, yeah, compromise the device and access the underlying, hardware sensors, GPS, accelerometer, things of that sort, the photo, its ability to turn on the cameras remotely, tap the microphones. And yeah, if anything, it really highlights how capabilities that were traditionally reserved for nation state level adversaries, right, are now being commoditized and sold for anyone to use and have those capabilities. It doesn't, instead of like, if anything, it shows how someone's taking what it would typically be a $1 or $2 million 0-day exploit that would, typically be sold to like some sort of exploit broker, but instead they're packaging it and commoditizing and selling it and making it freely available for other threat actors to utilize. And that's pretty wild. And in my
yeah,
opinion, I think it's only going to get worse just because if you think about it, the barriers to entry to pull this off are what? Technical software development capabilities, R&D. And now you're looking at the capabilities of coding agents just increasing exponentially. If you look at like coding benchmarks and their ability to think and reason and solve problems. So eventually you're going to get to the point where the cost to create these types of 0-day rats or whatever you want to call them, these mobile spyware kits is going to go down to zero, right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Uh, we also saw this week AI assisted deepfake CEO and Zoom scam. Brandon, I assume you know a little bit about this. This is a North Korea linked group that used AI generated executive impersonation and spoofed Zoom calls to socially engineer targets into running malware under the guise of troubleshooting. What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, if anything, this is just another example of how deepfake technology, whether it's video impersonations or voice impersonations, or just used together, right, in a real time
Yeah,
aspect over a Zoom teleconference call, it shows how this technology is being used to, I mean, not only conduct fraud and steal millions of dollars of cash, but also used to gain initial access into environments, right? Starting in what, early of 2024, there was the first public incident of a video impersonation in which threat actors impersonated the chief financial officer of a multinational organization.
yeah,
Similar attack chain, right? Where that person received a calendar invite to join a Zoom call. They joined that Zoom call, thought they were talking to company leadership. In this case, it was the chief financial officer. And long story short, that person was instructed to send $25 million, which they did because it was their CFO telling them what to do. Uh, so fast forward now 2 years, we're seeing that it's the same exact attack chain, right? They're sending out fake calendar invites to people, getting them to join a call. They think they're on a call with company leadership or people within the organization who they inherently trust. When they join the call, they see the person, they recognize the person. It's live, right? They're interacting with that person, and they're inherently trusting and doing whatever they ask them to do. In this case, it's called a click fix attack, in which they pretend they're troubleshooting, right? Hey, can you run this command? Can you run that command? What's the output? And using that in this case to establish a foothold on that environment. And then from there, use that initial access to then, pivot, move laterally towards whatever their trophy goal or whatever, whatever their objective is. But obviously, given who this threat actor is and given what they've historically targeted and also given this incident, again, they're just targeting cryptocurrency and finance related firms, obviously, to steal the crypto and fund all sorts of nefarious programs.
Yeah. Lastly, we have Poland Energy Grid cyber attack. This was a cyber attack that exploited the exposed edge devices and risk of IT to OT pivoting in critical infrastructure environments. This came from Cyberscoop. Brandon, do you have any insight onto that?
Laurent and I have worked on quite a few engagements together where the core problem has always been segmentation, right? Segmentation between the corporate environment into these sensitive environments. Your operational technology environment. In this case, this example, it controls what? The Poland energy grid. In other instances, other businesses have other environments that control all other whatever sensitive things they're working on. So yeah, if anything, it really highlights the need to properly segment your environments to prevent an attacker from pivoting and moving laterally between various endpoints, right? So if one device is compromised in, say, your IT or corporate environment, it prevents or mitigates the ability for the attacker to then pivot into that OT environment. And in this context, it looks like it was an environment that was responsible for controlling their energy grid, right?
Yeah.
I'll add that it's interesting that historically there's been a separation between IT and OT, but with the cloud environments, there is now the possibility of including things like device updates, right, from your cloud environment. And so the landscape has changed, right? Azure has one, I believe AWS has one as well, where you can literally provide an update over the air to all of a significant number of your IoT devices. Not all of them, not all brands are supported. But that level of convenience is definitely a downgrade in segmentation.
Yeah.
And so that's also something to look out for.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also segmentation between, in this case, it was an edge device. It was the device connected to the internet, right? It was publicly, in a way, it was publicly exposed. And because there wasn't proper segmentation between that device and whatever, the internal network, hackers were able to essentially pop that and then pivot into wherever they need to get to. So again, it really highlights the core issue here, and that is, proper network level segmentation between the devices to prevent someone from essentially moving between environments.
And we also actually have from the record, we saw nation state hackers using Gemini. This is state-backed threat actors that are leveraging Google Gemini AI to accelerate recon and refine malicious activity, reducing the time it takes to identify and exploit. What do we know about that?
If anything, it's another example of how LLMs are being used by threat actors to conduct offensive security engagements. You had an incident a few weeks ago in which an APT group out of China, I believe, was using Claude code to automatically conduct reconnaissance, perform exploitation, perform any sort of post-exploitation activities, gaining situational awareness, looking for things on the device, and then using that to automatically pivot and move laterally. And they were able to do this to a number of organizations. So if anything, this really highlights how large language models are going to be used for that purpose. Thankfully, in this case, if you think about it, they were using a frontier model. So if you think about it, all the API calls, anything that's being done, any sort of usage of those LLM models is being monitored by, say, Gemini, or in the case of the Claude incident, by Anthropic, right? So we're able to monitor and notice when these things are happening. But I think, if anything, the greater risk is when you look at these open source and open weight models that anyone can publicly download and run locally on their own systems. You don't have that level of oversight. You don't know when people are using them because there's no API calls being made, right? Or at least the inferencing. So yeah, it's a really wild time we live in. This is only the beginning, especially when you look at the future, agentic AI, how LLMs are the brains for running these sort of operations, and shows how these things are being leveraged and used to automate attackers' abilities and enhance and augment that, so they operate at a greater degree of efficiency.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for joining. This has been fun. What did we learn today? We decline calendar invitations. Don't click goofy links. Verify it is your CFO. It's really the security basics that keep popping up. Segmentation, stuff like that continues to be the core of it. So, thanks a lot for sharing your insights today, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, no problem.